Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Money Matters Top Tips for Success, where each and every day I bring on new business leaders, entrepreneurs, and executives and have them share their top tips for success with you. My name is Adam Torres. You can follow me on Instagram at AskAdamTorres. Keep up with my book releases, book tour schedule, signings, all that other good stuff. Always love to connect with you there. And as always, if you'd like to apply to become a co-author of one of my upcoming books, just head on over to the website, moneymatterstoptips.com, and click on Become an Author to apply. All right, so today is a very special Reunion 2020 episode. That's where I bring on guests that I had on in the past, and I liked them so much, I brought them back for a second round. Today's guest is Mike Figliuolo, who is Managing Director over at thoughtLEADERS, LLC. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Hey, it's great to be back again. Thanks for having me.
All right, so today's topic is going to be executive communications. But before we get into that, I don't want to assume that everybody heard your first episode. I think that was about a year ago we recorded that one. So let's get into what you're doing over at thougLEADERS, LLC as Managing Director. So first, tell us a little bit more about the company, please.
Yeah, we're a leadership development and training firm. I like to say we teach people all the skills that everybody needs that nobody ever teaches you. We teach topics of leadership, communications, problem solving, decision making. We work mostly with large corporations, but any corporation that's needing some help on those topics, we are happy to go in and teach it. So that's kind of what we do. And over the past year, we've spent some time adding to those offerings, things like executive presence and conflict resolution and change management. So as we're seeing needs out there in the marketplace for people to build new skills, we're seeing if that's something that we're happy to deliver.
It's awesome, and I think that's also a great transition. Let's just jump right into today's topic, executive communications. So first off, what does that mean to you?
A lot of times I'll get requests for people to get some executive coaching from us, and usually the request is, well, they don't have good executive presence. And I say, well, what does that mean? And what it usually boils down to... I was just going to say, yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And usually what it boils down to is the person is not comfortable in front of an audience, and they also don't do a great job of conveying their ideas. They'll tend to ramble, they'll include a lot of irrelevant information, and they're just not able to inspire an audience. So when we look at that, we say the root of it is not having clarity on what your message is, nor an understanding of what it is your audience wants. But if you have those two things, then you're able to put together a clearer and more compelling story for that audience, and hopefully that galvanizes them to action.
So obviously, you know, in a length of our interview, meaning 10 to 15 minutes, we're not going to have time to go into everything. But there are some people listening right now that they're like, you have their attention, like they were driving and then they turn the radio up, or they're in their office and they stop for a minute because they know that they fall into that category that you just mentioned. What are some like quick tips, or where does somebody even start? What's something actionable that somebody can do today to kind of start going down the right route and improving their communications?
Yeah, I think first is you've got to start with the audience. Too many times we make a recommendation from our perspective and let people know this is a great idea and here's why it's good for me. The problem is your audience doesn't care about that. They care why it's good for them. So you have to start with that audience and understand what I call the button, which is what is that one metric or that one issue that's going to get their attention and say, okay, I'm listening now. I understand that this idea has some benefit for me. And then I think the second thing you really got to do is be able to tell a well-structured story. Too many times I see folks just start assembling facts and pulling together this data and this analysis. I'm going to put this chart in. But there's no coherent flow of a story, of a narrative there to get that audience to understand, here's where we are, here's where we're going, and here's why it's good for you. I think if you can do those two things, you're well on your way to communicating a lot more effectively.
Man, I love that you bring these up, and they serve as a reminder, even for somebody that's seasoned, that's doing well. It's just a really good thing to always remember. And it never ends. So going back to those basics, it's kind of like your free throw shots. Like it never ends. You're always going to rack up points with them, and you need it. It's a fundamental. I had one. I'll have to share this with you, Mike. My horror story from last year. So I've done in my life, I don't know, I've done at least 1,000 speaking engagements, and minimum. I mean, I've been speaking since I was a kid and on stage. And last year I had my biggest bomb ever, like ever. And what happened was this: I didn't find out my audience. I assumed that they knew that they obviously booked me as a podcaster. They know I podcast. I mean, they knew who I was, what I do, and they booked me for that. So I had a presentation talking about podcasting and some other things like that. I looked at the demographic when I got there, and I'm like, wow, this audience is really young. I wonder, does anybody even know what a podcast is here? So to start off the talk, I basically asked the question. I'm like, hey, so how many of you listen to podcasts? Raise your hand. Only like a quarter of the room raised their hand. I asked the question, how many people know what a podcast is? The same quarter of the room raised their hand. I was in a room with a presentation about podcasting and media for that 75% of the room didn't even know what podcasts were because they were too young.
Yep, exactly. And then it's hard to have a compelling message that's going to get them to take action because they don't see what's in it for them.
I was done. I was done from the beginning. I already knew. I tried to change it, but all of my slides were geared towards podcasting metrics, other things like that. No, I was completely done, and it was such a rookie mistake. And I was like, oh man, I bombed this one, and it was all my fault. I didn't. Well, the organizer, you could argue, should have known in terms of booking me for what I do in the content. But either way, as the speaker, that was my role, my job. So I think that kind of thing happens day in and day out with executives that are delivering messages or key messages in the workplace to their employees. Yep,
absolutely. And you're spot on to say, hey, this is something that applies for your entire career. I see it all the time where you've got more senior folks who start telling the story from their perspective because they're used to everybody nodding and smiling because that's the senior person. But what you risk is people walk out of the room and you think that you have their commitment, but you don't because they don't understand what's in it for them. And then you sit there and wonder, well, everybody seems to like my idea. Why isn't it happening? And again, it's because you didn't tie it back to what's in it for the audience.
Oh man, that's a great point. I know. You just took me back to some of my earlier days, like in my earlier careers, where I'm thinking about leaving, like in the office, working at these big financial firms, and they're talking, you're nodding, you're smiling, you're in, and then you leave, and everybody's like, "What was that about?" or "What are we supposed to do?" or "What?" Like I don't like.
Yep.
That's the whole. Like as soon as you leave, and obviously one level below that management, they're gonna know because they're directives, right? Because they probably had a meeting about it beforehand. And they probably been strategizing that meeting for a month, but for the rank and file that are just getting started, we're like, huh?
Exactly.
Oh man, that's awesome, Mike. So in terms of the right type, so if somebody's listening to this and they want to learn more about how to improve their either personal executive communication skills and or for their company, for their executive staff, what's the right type of company or the right type of fit to reach out to Thought Leaders LLC just to make sure they're the right ones?
Yeah, so it's folks who are doing a lot of those communications up to senior leaders and to steering committees, or folks who are having to communicate to broader organizations and get their ideas across, really can benefit from the methods that we teach. Again, most of the time we're dealing with large corporates, but we've gone and worked with really small nonprofits. So it's really a function of, do you have a group of people who need to up their game on this skill? And we can usually help with that.
Perfect. And so, Mike, what is the best way for somebody to reach out to learn more about Thought Leaders LLC?
They should just come to our website at thoughtleadersllc.com, and they can learn all about the services we offer and get in touch with us there.
Perfect. Well, hey, Mike, really appreciate you coming back on the show and sharing more about your background and all the great work that you're doing over at Thought Leaders LLC. And thanks for the reminder and to know your audience, because that one's key. I love it. It's just one of those refreshers where you hit me with it, and I'm like, you got me too.
Yep.
And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. Hope you got a lot of value out of this, and I hope you took a lot away from it. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review in the Apple iTunes store, do all those great things we do to support our podcasters. And Mike, looking forward to catching up with you. We'll have to do a 2021 episode and see what else you have for me. Sound good?
That sounds great. Thanks so much.